Welcome to the Straight from the Source's Mouth podcast. Frank talk about sex and dating.
Hello, everyone. Tamara here again. Welcome to the show. Today's guest is DeVika Lyles, and we'll be talking about sexology and her various programs that she offers. If you like this episode, be sure to tell your friends about it and rate it as well. Thanks for joining me, DeVika.
Oh, you're welcome. Hello, how are you?
I am good.
Awesome. Thank you.
I've heard of the term sexology for a while, but never knew exactly what it was. So,
Well,
and I usually jump right in. Go ahead.
sorry. Yeah. So anytime you hear ology, it's usually the study of the science of something. And so ecology, biology, psychology, it's usually the study of the science of that thing. And
Okay.
so a sexologist is someone who studies or engages with the study of the body of work that we call sex. And that can be anywhere from being a sex therapist or sexologist, people who deal with the anatomy of sex, the conversations of sex, anybody who's actually in the study of human sexuality and what it takes for people to be successful in that realm of study.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I had never known, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. A lot of times, most people, when they hear sex, they don't hear the ology part. And for most of people, sex by itself is not something that we study. We don't talk about it. We don't actually study it or get engaged with it. And we truncate the power of what sexology actually is. And like every time you add an ending to the word sex, you get a different experience of it. Sexuality is different than sexology. They're in the same realm, but it's totally different experience. Sexual is different than sexuality or sexology, same realm, totally different experience. And most people focus on just the sex, which even that, most people then truncate the sex to just the physicality of what we actually, engage with. And so most people are experiencing, that I just study the physicalness of like slot A into slot B, rub until there's friction. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
that's a very small part, actually, of what I do.
Okay. Well, since you brought up that it's a small slice, what do you do generally? I know you offer a lot of different programs, but like overall.
Sure. So around that very small slot A into slot B, rub until there's friction, there are all kinds of thoughts, emotions, communication, experiences, thoughts, I said thoughts, ideas, beliefs, conversations, systems, um, rules, regulations, expectations, laws, politics. Um, and I am in that realm. Most sexologists are in that realm. So if you were to look at the world of sex and sexology from perhaps my perspective, I don't know that all sexologists are this way, but people tend to focus on the bullseye of the target, right? If the world of sexology was a target, most people are only focused on that tiny little piece in the middle, and they're trying to hit that tiny little piece in the middle, and that tiny little piece in the middle is where they experience orgasm or bliss or satisfaction. And then if you think about all the different rings around the target, that's what I deal with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because, like you said, and the orgasm lasts, only so long, depending on, who you are, who you're with. But yeah, you gotta have the lead up to it and everything else. So
Yeah. Well,
like you said,
and all of the work that people put on this experience of orgasm, which is great. I love having orgasms. I have orgasms as much as I can, but we're ignoring all the other parts. And then when we land on something else, which we're apt to do, people consider that a failure or a breakdown or a problem. I didn't hit the orgasm piece, but you're also not tending to all the other things around the orgasm piece. And so one of the programs that I do lead is it's called the Seven Sexological Conversations. And we have a system of what I've identified. I'm sure somebody else could find more, but of seven um, areas and that are impacting how we experience that tiny piece. And that is the first one is the systems, the science, and the sexology. So if I have a system that is not based on proper sexual science, the way that I engage with sexology is going to be very limited or askew, or it can only go as big as my system. So if I live in a family where we don't talk about sex, we don't talk about feelings, we don't talk about anything like that, then my access to the science behind sex is also going to be limited. I'm going to not refer to my body with the proper terms. I'm going to feel a particular way based on the words that are used about my body parts and my basic fundamental experience of myself. Then, because sexology is the study or the engagement or the understanding of the science, everything that I think about will now be askew. So I'll just see what you're hearing about that, and then I can go into the other ones. Because for most people, the science and the systems is like that's why these things happen not necessarily in an order, but this one is foundational. So what are you hearing me say?
yeah, I mean, well, what I'm hearing is like the emotions and the feelings that people don't know how to feel are what help you connect with a partner that allows you to have better orgasms. So if that part's missing, you can't get to the bullseye.
Well, yeah.
So it's like you're
Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah. No, I mean, I think that's what I heard. So
Yeah, and we haven't even gotten to the emotions part yet. It's if your religion teaches you a particular thing, or if the laws it's whatever your system is. And a system is just an organization of thoughts, ideas, and beliefs. So your family system could be different than an educational system, which could be different than a religious system, which could be different than your political or legal system. So your family could be very, very sex positive and have a very free and open sexual system. But the laws of your town or your city or your area could be very rigid. And so even though your system is open and free, the system that regulates that system is more closed and narrow. So we're not even at the emotions. We're just at the fundamental place where you develop the ideas and the network of conversations that you're in.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cause I mean, I know, like I would talk about this in other episodes, my family was open about it. And luckily my, culture, like in the US, it's more open than some cultures, but depending on where you are and where you live, I guess. But yeah, no, I know, I get what you're saying. So yeah. And then you put two people together and then the two systems are probably even more, have more pull.
Well, yeah, and then we're not talking about those systems. We're not actually when we meet people, we're trying to get to the bullseye. Oh, I am attracted to you. Bullseye. But not what is the system of beliefs that you grew up in about the sex? Because that again is going to impact the science. Because with you being open and having conversations like this, um, you will inherently be someone that if their system was closed and they say, oh, well, we don't talk about it, here it is, you run a podcast where you invite people to talk about it, you are instantly going to have to overcome those two networks of conversations and how they engage with one another. I wouldn't immediately say you're incompatible, but if left unaddressed, that's going to become a point of contention for people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean,
mm-hmm.
Since you brought it up, I was going to say, because I have this podcast, people generally are more open to talk to me about stuff, like all kinds of stuff, than they probably would, like pretty quickly, pretty
Mm-hmm.
early on. They'll share because I'm like, they get that I'm going to be less judgmental and open-minded and more open-minded.
Yeah, that is great for those who are seeking the open-mindedness. And then there are people, and I just say this as a sexologist, there are people that the moment I say I'm a sexologist, they are heading for the heels. That is too, like, even the word, like, once, especially if I break it down, then they're heading for the hills because it's like, oh, that's just too much. So your experience and my experience might be different. But there is a listening of, oh, that person is going to talk to me about sex or want to talk about sex. And it's great for the people whose systems match that system. But if it's somebody, like I said, if it's somebody whose system and they're deeply entrenched in that system, you may actually not get a chance to engage with them because they're not going to engage with you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there was one person, I have a card from my podcast and I gave it to one guy and he looked at it and was like, I could tell. I'm like, I'll take it back if you don't want it. He's like, yeah, he just gave it to me without saying anything. So yeah, I do get that exists as well.
Yeah, like I did a talk and with this group that I've been a part of for a while, and they sent out what I was going to talk about onto their distribution list. They had been in existence for, like, I don't know, 6 to 8 months before they invited me on, and they had, as soon as they sent out what I was going to be talking about, which is this topic, the 7 sexological conversations, they had like 5 people unsubscribe.
Wow. Yeah.
Just because of the topic. And that's because when we get into the next ones, the next area that I talk about, and again, these are not necessarily in any particular order. I put them in an order so that I can remember them all, but they don't engage humanly. They don't engage beyond the first one. There's not any order to the engagement. And the second one is race, decolonization, and culture. So you kind of spoke about that, right? Like, hey, I'm pretty open and the US is pretty open, but if we came from a culture that wasn't open, we would then colonize ourselves to match the system. And what I feel, and I want to be very, very clear because I know that colonization has been thrown out around. For me, colonization is anything that is interrupting the status of the natural person inhabiting the area, which means the rules and regulations that interrupt how I would naturally freely self-express. So for me, colonization happens in very subtle ways, especially at the level of sexology. That could be the way that we tell little girls, or little girl bodies, or little female bodies, that if they're wearing a dress, they can't spin around because and we don't explain to them why they can't spin around. And when you're 4 or 5, the idea of your panties showing has no relevance to you whatsoever. It has no relevance in your life. You're spinning and you're enjoying your life. You're enjoying your body. You're enjoying who you are as the inhabitant of your skin. But then this rule comes along and says, well, we don't do that. And you learn to scale down. You learn not to enjoy your body on very incremental levels. And so that colonization, that interruption is based on race. It's based on culture. It's also based on gender or gender expression. But I go into that a little bit further down. The other one that we talk about is next is gender and gender self-expression, because then we're moving into what boys and girls, or what we assert are boys and girls, what are female and male bodies, what are they allowed to do? And we give them rules and we give them regulations and we give them roles. And then we have another set. After we go through that, we have another set. We have the neurology and the physicality of health and wellness and who's allowed to engage in sex how based on their mental health or their physical health. And then we have access and ability, right? So we say, oh, you know what? You know who's allowed to break all of these rules? Rich people. They are allowed to break all of those rules. They're allowed because they have a certain level of access and affluency. So they're allowed to break those rules. And then we have,
Yeah.
then we have trauma and we have transformation. And we have people who are then traumatized by these rules. And for me, trauma does not have to be a big thing. Trauma can be anything, big or small, that you either wanted to happen and it didn't happen, and it altered how you experienced yourself because it didn't happen, no matter how big or small, or it is something that happened, no matter how big or small, that you didn't want to happen, and it had an impact on how you self express. And then, of course, there's uh, what I call shadow work and self expression. And those are how we experience ourselves and our bodies, and then how we deal with the negative impacts of all these things that I've just spoken about. So, those are roughly the seven, not by their official titles or whatever, but it gives people a gist of like, oh, um, now I've broadened my conversation. So now a conversation about abortion, which usually seems like it's a conversation about sex, is actually a conversation about your healthcare. It's actually a conversation about being colonized. It's very actually, it gets all these layers versus we've been experiencing, which is it's a punishment for sex. So I'm going to just, I know you can't see me and I can't see you. So I'm just going to pause and um, just check in. What are you hearing me say?
Yeah, well, the biggest thing is just, all this stuff of why it's so hard, like to have relationships, really. Like all of this things that everyone's thinking about and the way they are brought up differently and all the different systems that each person has. I can see why relationships can be so hard. And I know what you didn't say that exactly, but just, the systems that are out there that you don't really think about, they just are. And you don't realize how much they affect you. I mean, obviously a few here and there, like as women, we know that, especially back in the day, we were treated as lesser. And so, I mean, I get that, but yeah, it's just a lot to think about. And then you bring all of that into the bedroom,
Yeah.
having not talked about it.
Yeah. Not only that, you don't even just bring it into the bedroom, you bring it into the conversations, you bring it into, just what are you thinking about? And before we even get to the bedroom, people are having sexological conversations all of the time, all of the time. Most of our conversations I can link to some aspect of sexology. We're talking about, just all most of the things that hit the news as far as like celebrities are often sexological conversations. Right now, one of the big things is, I don't know, for me, it's big in the world of like social conversations that I'm in. Chris Brown is doing meet and greets with people, and people are paying to meet him. Chris Brown, if you're not aware, is a musician who was accused of physically abusing another celebrity, Rihanna. So now here we have a trauma. We have a trauma conversation based on the abuse. And then we have an access conversation based on the celebrity. We have a systems and a science and a sexology conversation because based on your system, which is do abusers get reprieve, you're going to engage in that conversation from a system of beliefs that's like, no, this dude is a bad guy, a good guy, whatever your system says, and people should or should not be paying for um, pictures with him based on that system. That's a sexological conversation on at least three levels.
I can see at least a couple levels. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of my flagship programs is I really want people to have access um, to starting to delineate what conversation am I in? because when it's like, when we just boil it down to that target, should we or should we not be having sex? Now there's no depth, there's no richness. It's just a bunch of judgment. And like you said, we get to the bedroom with that, but we can't even get through normal conversations. We can't even get through like understanding that gender is separate from sex, like the systems of what sex is, right? Our sexual systems, male and female and intersex, are actually sexual systems, like anatomic systems. They're sexual reproductive systems. I am not female. I am a person with a female reproductive system. It would be like calling me female as the fullness of who I am anatomically would be like calling me muscular, like my muscular system. And we use that word, but it would be like calling me an optical system. I have an optical system. I have a muscular system. I have a female reproductive system, which is the entire word of that. The entire distinction is a female reproductive system assigned at birth, which is important because that may or may not be my gender expression. And so all of these conversations about trans people and, LGBTQ people and all of these conversations that people seem to have very solid and very rigid opinions about, they're not actually taking time to understand where those opinions are generated. They're just kind of reacting based on their system is a lot of the time my experience. And so when you try to interrupt that and you try to say, hey, look, let's just really step back and look at where the judgment is coming from, what the understanding is, and educating people about that. That's the work that I do.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's a lot. And like you said, I mean, I've definitely heard, because, well, I guess you may not know, I was in the military. And so we always said male and female. It was just to describe each other. But like you're saying, that's not, necessarily the proper, well, not, you're either a man or a woman, or never mind. I don't even want to go into this because I'll say it all wrong. I know what you're getting at though. Yeah. Gender expression is different than male, female.
And intersex. And a lot of times what you bring up is very important for people to realize. In the military, and in policing, and in communities that are heavily militarized or heavily policed, male, female, and occasionally intersex, because most times those systems are built on a binary, so they don't include intersex, even though I want to just keep pointing to intersexuality. If male and female as a descriptor of a human being is often used to actually dehumanize them. It's actually it's to remove that connection of our human selves. And a lot of the militarizing, especially when we are in a war or a system in which, or an experience in which death may be inevitable, we use male and female to separate ourselves from the concept of actually negatively impacting a person. Because a male or a female or an intersex person, or a system with a person with that system, might as well be a male or female dog, might as well be a male or female coaxial cable. We use those terms to actually separate the humanity of people. So that's, and you'll see that in communities where policing is very high. They will really respond to and engage with one another as male or female. And you'll see that in the anti-trans and anti-queer communities, but it's done to dehumanize people. And the thing is that people who are doing that based on their systems and their science, they may not actually know that they are actively dehumanizing people. So then you go out and you have people using male or female because they are in an area that is either highly policed or highly militarized. That's how they've learned to engage with one another. And for them, it's fine because in their culture that they have engaged with and been colonized by, that's how they relate to each other. And so then you get to someone else who does not have that experience. And now you see a breakdown in conversation. Now you see people arguing on the internet. Well, I don't see why this word is wrong. And then we have to have whole, we have to have whole diatribes and videos on why calling women female, because it usually happens in the dehumanization of female-bodied people, why that matters.
Yeah. I've definitely seen that with age differences as well. Like older generation is more inclined to say it, because, well, maybe at least older military people. Maybe that was where I knew it from. But yeah, it definitely seems to be an age thing too.
Well, yeah. And so if your system is a highly militarized system, maybe you grew up in a military family, you grew up around military people. So you have nothing going on about, oh, this person called me a female, blah, blah, blah. Like you don't have anything going on about it. Whereas I'm a civilian and I've just been a woman or a girl my whole life. So I would take umbrage to being called a female. Because mostly because, again, of my system and of the science and of how I engage with sexology. So,
yeah,
yeah.
I can see that. I know we only got to cover like one, well, obviously the 7 different areas within the one program, and we're also heading towards the end. So I was wondering if you had like just like a final thoughts thing you wanted to leave the listeners with.
Sure. I just released my catalog, and my catalog also, I shared that with you so you can share that with others. I do conversations about touch and communication. I do sex positive parenting classes because I think we are hitting an age where people want to be open and they see the benefit of being open with their kids, but they don't have the access or the tools to do so themselves. I also do some courses on non-monogamy and on what I call alternative, although that's not true, just a different aspect of different relationships. And I'm very, proud of my coaching, and I make a lot available by bridging not only sexology, but transformative educational practices and just a sense of coaching and counseling. And I blend all 3 of those together so that people have a more holistic view of their sexual selves. So the catalog has a whole bunch of classes. It has programs where I'm going to be like on programs like this. And so I just really appreciate you allowing me to share. And if people want to register, if you'll share it with them, I'm pretty accessible and they can just reach out. My email address is dmarcellalyles@gmail.com. And my phone number is 720-588-3227. And the organization that I do this through is the Center for Transformative Sexology. So thank you for having me on today.
Yeah, thank you. And I was going to ask, or not ask, I was going to let you offer how to reach you, but that was good. So you did that. Yeah, no, I mean, always lots of things to think about. Yeah, that's some good stuff.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it is a deeper subject. It's something I could talk about all day. But I very rarely talk about what people think I talk about. And I just laugh because I think the expectation is that I'm sitting around talking about things that people, and I'm not often talking about those at all. I'm talking about your emotions, your feelings. How did you get here? What is the impact on you? And what would you like to create if you weren't encumbered by conversations you actually didn't create? So thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, thank you again. And if you want to work with DeVika, definitely reach out. And if you like this episode, be sure to tell your friends about it and rate it as well. And thank you again, DeVika.
Awesome.
And thanks, everyone.
Frank Talk, Sex and Dating educates.